Welcome to the Steering Change podcast, navigating through the commercial transportation industry in Alberta and beyond, powered by the Alberta Motor Transport Association. Here's your host, Kelsey Hipkin.
Hello, friends of Steering Change. Please note we do have a trigger warning for today's episode, as we will be discussing topics that could contain human trafficking, sexual assault, and more. And with that, we are back with the conclusion of our three-part series, The Road Beneath: Ethics, Exploitation, and Accountability in Trucking, in which we're pulling back the curtain on the trucking and logistics industry. In episode 1, we looked at Who We Trust Matters, Carrier Vetting and Ethical Responsibility, in which Dave Hewlett of Loblaws discussed best practices in carrier partnerships, why brand protection goes beyond logos and marketing, and why knowing exactly who is hauling your freight matters more than ever. From there, we moved on to episode 2, Driver Inc., the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, and Success Stories from the Front Lines, where AMTA President Robert Harper outlined how industry is addressing the Driver Inc. model, in which we were also joined by Robert Kupinick and Gerald Nakano of Canada Cartage discussing a success story of the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. Now for today, we are going beyond the silence, delving into the world of human trafficking and commercial transportation. According to the TAT, or Truckers Against Trafficking website, there are 50 million victims of human trafficking globally. Trafficking garners $236 billion in illicit profits annually. 10 provinces in Canada have reported human trafficking, and 43% of human trafficking survivors are identified as people of color. The commercial transportation industry is key in combating human trafficking, as the traffickers themselves are often traveling on the same routes as traffickers and their victims. Commercial drivers can be key eyes and ears on the road to identify when something might not be right. To discuss further, we're joined for this final episode of The Road Beneath by Dylan Wecht, TAT Director of Public Sector Engagement. Dylan, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
To start, can you tell us a bit about yourself and the work that you do with TAT?
Absolutely. So my name is Dylan Wecht. I'm the Director of Public Sector Engagement at TAT, formerly known as Truckers Against Trafficking. And how I like to best explain TAT and our work, we kind of have two sides of the house. So on one side, we're working with the transportation industry, obviously trucking, bus, energy, in-home movers and delivery, transit, motor coach, whatever it may be. And then on the other side, we're working with the public sector, so law enforcement, local and municipal governments, provincial governments, the federal government. So while our work obviously intersects on both sides, I'm obviously on the public sector side. So my role primarily focuses on training law enforcement and other government entities, ministries, and departments.
Thank you so much, Dylan. And as always, super happy to have TAT aboard and joining us for the podcast today. So let's start with more of a broad look at human trafficking and some of the numbers. With 50 million victims globally and billions generated in illegal profits, what do these numbers tell us about the scale of trafficking networks?
Yeah, so I mean, from that question, two things pop out, right? 50 million victims and then billions of dollars in illegal profit. I think that highlights two big things or two important realities that we need to look at. It is massive in scale and it is highly organized. You're talking about, specifically 50 million victims, which is a number that came from the ILO, or the International Labor Organization. And it's showing that human trafficking isn't this rare crime that people sometimes think it is. This is happening on a massive scale. And it is resulting in billions and billions of dollars of revenue being made by these traffickers. And they're operating like a business model, because we're talking about a very, very large amount of money. I know it was $150 billion at one point. I think the most recent figure is $237 billion.
Wow.
So we're talking about individuals that are doing it for a profit. And it does not matter if it is being done on a smaller scale or if it is an international criminal organization that has their hands in several crimes. They're all doing this for the profit. So I think that shows us that it is happening on a large scale, and some of these are operating with business-like models.
And I mean, it's not limited to one piece of the world or one region of the world. I read on your website that 10 provinces in Canada have reported human trafficking. So do you see regional patterns or trends that the commercial transportation industry should be aware of?
Absolutely. So human trafficking occurs across Canada. There are some patterns worth noting. I mean, it happens in big cities, it happens in rural, suburban areas. I know that in some of the most recent statistics, they have highlighted certain provinces, Ontario, BC, Alberta, because of population density, different transportation corridors and economic hubs. But that gets me onto a bigger trend, which would be relevant here. There's major activity occurring on these highway corridors, the major highway corridors, within the energy sector and within those regions. So certain regions of the province that are dedicated to different energy projects, they have the man camps and all of that, the oil sands, and then agricultural areas as well. So those are some trends to look at. Another one, and people often have this misconception that movement is a required element of human trafficking. It is not. Hypothetically, not hypothetically at all, actually. In several cases, an individual can be trafficked out of their home for the duration of their trafficking, or out of a single hotel or motel. But oftentimes, transportation is involved to generate a higher profit in another province or another city, to evade law enforcement, or to isolate and confuse the victim. So this can be also referred to as being on a circuit, individuals that are being moved to certain cities. And again, to get to these cities, there's mobility, right? They're traveling on highways, they're stopping at truck stops, they're interacting with those in the transportation sector. So that's another important trend to keep in mind, especially for our industry partners.
And I mean, it's awful. Usually the motivation is a sexual one, but we also see people are impacted on the labor side of things. Can you kind of talk about the two?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic question. There's always been a greater focus with sex trafficking, and that approach has been taken from everyone, obviously the general public, but law enforcement, NGOs. There was this focus on sex trafficking. It's very important that we always talk about and recognize labor trafficking as well. When you go back and look at that 50 million victim number that you quoted in the second question, the predominant form of human trafficking worldwide is labor trafficking, not sex trafficking. There are more labor trafficking victims. There are several reasons why it is not as popular, if you will, or why it's not detected or prosecuted at the same rates. But it is certainly happening. And I know that they just released statistics from 2014 to 2024, a 10-year period, which just came out this past December. And they noted an increase in male victims, which reflects labor trafficking detection, since obviously male victims can be sex trafficked as well. But you do see a higher number of male victims in labor trafficking. So they are starting to detect it a bit more. There's more training on that, but labor trafficking obviously can happen in any kind of industry. We all obviously always associate it with agriculture and construction, or domestic housework in a hotel, motel, restaurant, and that's certainly happening. But it can happen everywhere. There are cases where it is happening within religious institutions, with fish processing, you name it. I'm sure that there is either labor exploitation or labor trafficking case in that industry. So it's very important that we touch on that.
Perfect. Thank you, Dylan. Now let's shift focus a bit to commercial transportation. What are some of the red flags or behavioral indicators that commercial drivers should or could be trained to recognize? And I'm going to make this a two-parter. Does TAT have resources that can help with that?
Yes. So I'll start with the second part. One thing that we highlight at TAT, it's kind of the cornerstone of our program, are our unique specific trainings to different industries. So just looking at the trucking industry, we have a specific training for the over the road, the long haul truck drivers. We have more of a local truck driver video. We have in-home movers and delivery. So that is to say that we have trainings that have been specifically made for you, whichever sector you fall in, that highlight these red flag indicators that you could potentially see during the course of your everyday job. And I can go into a few, and just to preface this with saying, no single indicator is going to prove trafficking, right? That's like another crime, that there could be an indicator and it's another criminal activity going on, or it's not a criminal activity at all. But some of what I'm about to say are common indicators. And if you see some of these indicators together, then you want to start asking more questions and obviously reporting that to law enforcement, someone who can investigate that. So the first one being a person who appears to be controlled by someone else. And this does not mean shackled and chained up. This means someone who is not able to speak for themselves, someone who is clearly not making eye contact with any other individual other than their potential trafficker. So their speech, their movements, who they interact with is being controlled. Someone who is appearing fearful or anxious, unable to move freely. Some of these are going to be behavioral indicators. Then you could obviously have signs of physical abuse, malnourishment, exhaustion. Malnourishment's a big one. People have asked questions on that. That is obviously a tactic that traffickers are going to use to better control their victims. Obviously, if you're not getting enough food, you don't have the energy to, say, fight back or leave, or they're using food as an incentive to do whatever work they're forcing you to do. So malnourishment has been seen in a number of these cases. I would say specifically for transportation hubs, individuals that are being picked up or dropped off repetitively, people that you are seeing on a normal basis. If individuals are getting dropped off back by the trucks and there's a car monitoring them, if there is a passenger vehicle parked out back by the trucks, or there was a case where an RV was parked out back by the trucks where they were trafficking a girl out of that RV. So what I would say is, you know your industry, you know how it operates, and when things seem abnormal, whether there's some of these indicators I've talked about, someone's acting anxious or fearful, or you see someone keeping an eye on someone, or it's something else, I would highly recommend that you just keep your eye out and see what's going on, because we usually operate on a typical schedule. Stuff usually, operates a certain way. And if something is happening that is irregular at, let's say, a truck stop that you regularly go to, I would keep an eye on that.
And from a training side of things, what does effective anti-trafficking training look like for carriers, dispatches, drivers, kind of the gamut?
Absolutely. So I think that for training to be effective, it needs to be practical, it needs to be industry specific, and it needs to be universal, repeatable. You need to be able to have that as something that can be taken by multiple individuals at your company or organization. So I think it has to obviously focus on recognizing these red flag indicators in a real world transportation environment. So it has to be unique to your environment, to your workplace. Understanding how to report, safe reporting procedures, because, and I should have emphasized before, we're not asking anyone to be a vigilante. We do not want anyone to step in and actually become involved in this situation, because these traffickers can oftentimes be dangerous individuals. So the whole point of the training and of this program is to recognize these red flag indicators and then to report that to law enforcement who is trained to deal with this. And in those safety procedures, safety reporting procedures, knowing what details to document. So that would be for drivers. For dispatchers, obviously understanding how trafficking can intersect with freight movement, establishing internal reporting procedures, if they are getting information from a driver. There was a case recently with the dispatcher involved, and they had an internal reporting protocol. So you never want to have to invent something on the spot, right? So what training will do is help you actually formulate that internal protocol. And we work with companies as well to give recommendations and help make that. So I think a lot of good trainings, good effective programs are going to have these elements.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat myself a bit, but I want to stay with you on the protocol piece. So, how
Mhm.
are ways organizations can integrate those types of anti-trafficking protocols into their existing safety and compliance frameworks?
We always say this at TAT, you do not need to reinvent the wheel. We are not asking anyone to build a new system or work in anything that's unfamiliar. Anti-trafficking protocols can be integrated into already existing safety and compliance structures that can include your driver safety programs, corporate ethics, sorry, that was a tricky one, compliance procedures, compliance policies. It can go into incident reporting systems. You can have different codes of conducts with vendors, contractors. So the point being is that you can work this into already existing company structures.
Awesome, thank you. And then, kind of a broader picture of industry. What role do associations and large shippers play in setting expectations and standards for anti-trafficking efforts?
I love this question because obviously we want everyone to be involved, and it's fantastic whether it's a single company, a group of companies, an association that are becoming involved in this fight against human trafficking. But when we're talking about an industry association or a large shipper, they play such an incredibly important role because they obviously are going to influence what is being done. They influence the standards across the industry, across the supply chains. So when you have a big shipper or a big association promoting anti-trafficking policies, promoting anti-trafficking training, it is showing that this is something that they care about, and that this is something that everyone should care about as part of a responsible business practice. And just moving forward, they can obviously encourage companies to adopt training. They can include anti-trafficking language into different codes of conduct, as I just spoke about before. They can share best practices across the industry. So in many ways, they are force multipliers, right? They're helping awareness spread even faster than doing this on an individual basis.
Thank you so much for that, Dylan. And when one is thinking about human trafficking, whether it be the young ages of some of the victims or some of the exploitation that does take place, it tends to take one kind of to the dark place. I was wondering if you could tell us a driver success story or two that has been involved with industry. I know we had Heather Fry at our annual conference last year. She spoke very well about some drivers who have made a difference. Do you kind of have some examples on that front?
Absolutely. We have been lucky to hear from multiple drivers and those within the industry who have been able to recognize individuals who were victims of human trafficking and to help obviously report that to law enforcement. I'm not sure which cases Heather shared with you, but one of the major stories that we talk about all of the time involve a young woman. So she was not a minor, but she was a young woman who was with two individuals in their RV traveling across the country, and she was being trafficked on a regular basis. They were posting ads for her on Craigslist, and going to truck stops and rest areas where buyers would come to those areas. She was with them for approximately 3 weeks, and they were at a truck stop, and a truck driver had pulled in for the night, was going to take his break, go to sleep, and he noticed this RV parked out back by the trucks. And he recognized a few different red flag indicators of what he had learned. One of those being different men entering the RV He also saw this young woman's face in the back window and the curtain pull shut. And he also had a small interaction with one of the traffickers inside that just did not sit right with him. So again, he had never been in this kind of situation before, but he felt that something was happening. So he called law enforcement. And because of that call and because of how quickly and how efficiently law enforcement dealt with that, it turned out that, as I mentioned before, this young woman was not only being trafficked, but going through unexplicable violence on a daily basis. And I will not share the details here, but that is to say that what she had been going through was absolute hell. And because of that call, because of him seeing those red flag indicators, she was able to get away from those two. Those two were sentenced for quite a long time, and she was able to get home to her family and get the obviously health services that she needed. And that all came from a call from a truck driver. And the one other case I will share, we have decals that sometimes are put on the windows or somewhere on the truck. And one time a driver was parked at a truck stop, again, taking a break, and a victim recognized the decal on his truck, knocked on the window. He wasn't sure what was going on at first, but he was a father, is a father, has daughters, was worried for this young woman's safety, invited her into the cab and learned of her situation. And he was able to then keep her safe, lock the doors, give her a blanket, give her something to eat and drink, and wait for law enforcement to come so she would be able to get out of that situation. So those were just two stories of many that show how important truck drivers can be in these situations. And obviously they're going above and beyond in these situations, but it's still in the everyday course of their job. So you're not being asked to go anywhere or do anything different. Just recognizing what's going on around you, which truck drivers are already incredible at, and then showing compassion to these individuals that are or could be victims of human trafficking.
Great. Thank you, Dylan. And obviously, major kudos to those drivers. I know drivers are key to seeing some of these things out there. They're on the road 24/7. They're all over the place. So for these resources that Dylan has been mentioning for our listeners, we will have those in the show notes, how you can access those, some of the things to watch out for. Dylan, as always, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and insight today. Is there anything that you would like to add?
I would just like to add that human traffickers like to rely on invisibility, silence. They think that they can operate and that nobody will notice. And when the transportation sector, when truck drivers are trained to recognize these red flag indicators, that goes away, right? Because you are seeing these red flag indicators, you are reporting them to law enforcement, and therefore this crime is no longer invisible. So I would encourage everyone to train, to become more aware of what human trafficking looks like in your area, because as I just shared in those stories, you can change someone's life. So I already want to thank everyone who is already doing this. I want to thank you guys for having us on and for sharing this, because it's such an important message.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dylan, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again so much, Dylan, and I would like to thank everyone who tuned in for The Road Beneath, Ethics, Exploitation, and Accountability in Trucking. If you've missed one of our episodes or are on the road and want to listen back to back, you can download all three wherever you get your favorite podcast. Now for some AMTA news. AMTA's 88th annual conference takes place April 22nd to 23rd at the Grey Eagle Event Center in Calgary. Join us for a jam-packed program covering industry, enforcement, communication, and the impacts of artificial intelligence, as well as our awards dinner, trade show, and more. Registration details are available at amtaconference.ca. Please keep in mind that our trade show is sold out, so thank you to everyone who has signed up, but if you do still want to get in on the networking, tickets are available. Now for some save the dates. Keep those eyes peeled to your AMTA channels, as we'll soon be dropping details on our 76th Professional Truck Driving Championship, taking place Saturday, May 30th at our Edmonton International Airport location. As well, we've secured dates for our 2026 safety summits, so mark your calendars for May 14th in Medicine Hat and September 30th in Whitecourt. Registration details for those will be dropping soon. Do you have any questions or comments about today's episode or other Steering Change episodes? Please do reach out on our Instagram at AMTA_CA or LinkedIn and Facebook at Alberta Motor Transport Association. Stay safe and see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of AMTA's Steering Change podcast. The views expressed by guests of the Steering Change podcast are their own and may not reflect the views of AMTA, its hosts, or sponsors. Did you have a question that you would like answered on an upcoming episode of the Steering Change podcast? We want to hear from you. To submit a question to the Steering Change mailbag, hit up our DMs on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram with the hashtag Steering Change, and your question will be answered either live on the podcast or by one of our SMEs here at AMTA. We ask that you share this episode with those in your network that could benefit from what we discussed today, and make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform so you can be notified when future episodes are released. You can learn more about us and our mission by visiting www.amta.ca. Now get out there and have a safe day.